First to Libya, and a blast from the political past, a name that hasn't been heard in a while, Gaddafi, and specifically the son of the late Colonel Muammar Gaddafi. He's known as Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, and he's declared himself to be officially a candidate for next month's presidential election. Mind you, he's yet to have his registration officially approved, but pictures have been released of him launching his campaign in the south of the country. It's thought he is eligible to run for office, even though he's wanted by the International Criminal Court at the moment and by a high court in Libya as well. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now from London by the respected Middle East analyst, Dr. Saul Zadka. Always a pleasure to see you, Dr. Zadka. Can he actually run for president in Libya? Does it look like his candidacy will actually get approved, or is it difficult to know right now?
Well, Charles, good afternoon. I doubt it. I think that he may be disqualified. It is to do with the fact that in Tripoli there is a death sentence, and in the International Criminal Court there is also a summons. So he may not be approved by the Libyan authorities as well as by certain foreign troops that are still on the ground. But let me quote the leader of the Libyan Democratic Party. His name is Ahmed Shabani. He's based in London because he's very much afraid to be in Libya. And he told me when there's any chance that Gaddafi Jr. may be elected for the role of the leader of Libya. And he said, it is easier for a camel to pass through an eye of a needle than safe to reach high office in Libya. He thinks that even without the intervention of the foreign powers, it would be completely impossible for the people who are running Libya at the moment, including some tribes who are not really intoxicated by the so-called nostalgic loyalty of his father when Libya was kind of a very prosperous or at least stable country. They would not be not only voting for him, they would not allow him to run.
Interesting that you say that, and obviously your analysis are always very well respected internationally, but we're also hearing that according to the electoral law in Libya, that unless a person is actually convicted, that they can run, that the fact that you've got arrest warrants out on his head does not disqualify him from running. But obviously, there, as you pointed out, there may be other political considerations. Nevertheless, he's wanted both internationally and locally in Libya. A number of arrest warrants out for him, as we said. But beyond that, he is a very divisive character, isn't he? I mean, surely he can't be seen as a consensus figure, which is what Libya needs now, doesn't it?
Well, in a way, he was the one who prompted the intervention of NATO in Libya 10 years ago when he sided with his father, contrary to all kind of expectation in the West, and vowed to crush the rebellions in Benghazi in eastern Libya like cockroaches. He was the one who was about to embark on an offensive against the citizens of Benghazi in order to eliminate them. And this was, I think, was his downfall. When you think about the fact that he was supportive of his father throughout the civil war, I don't think there is much appetite among Western countries, including the United States and certainly Britain, to support him. However, he enjoys some support in the Gulf. The Arab Emirates and the Saudis think that he could be a compromise candidate to solve the issues of Libya. However, this would be resisted by countries such as Turkey, that has thousands of soldiers on Libyan ground, and they would not have any appetite for any second Gaddafi to power. It is also to do with the fact that other Arab countries who support Khalifa Haftar, the other candidate, the warlord from the east, may support him and would be very, very resistant to the idea of having another Gaddafi in power 10 years after the demise of his father.
Yes, I've heard that point made about Khalifa Haftar. So, Dr. Zadka, here you have all these divisive figures, candidates with guns behind them, as it were, and yet this is supposed to be the consensus election that brings the country together. How much of a damaging wrecking ball is the whole procedure?
I would risk even the assumption that maybe the elections would not take place at all. First of all, there is not much agreement about the date. It is scheduled to take place on Christmas Eve. And there are many forces in operation who think that this is too early because the civil war is still raging. The parties to process are not ready enough. However, it could be that eventually they will take place. After all, many millions of Libyans are interested in stability that may come after such elections. And at the moment, we are talking about at least 5 candidates: the former interior minister, the current prime minister, the speaker of the Libyan parliament, Khalifa Haftar, and Saif al-Islam al-Gaddafi. That means that it is definitely going into a second round a few weeks later, and it could be that eventually some kind of a compromise would be achieved after the elections in the shape of a national unity government. This, I think, would be the only solution to ensure stability in Libya, at least in the short term.
And it's very interesting that you mentioned there, Dr. Zadka, the millions of people in Libya who are obviously very interested in this ballot. And of course, elections are supposed to be a serious test of public opinion and allows the public to express its will. But there is grave concern that these elections are going to be rigged. Ballots are going to be stuffed in areas controlled by armed groups such as eastern Libya, where the warlord that you mentioned, Khalifa Haftar, controls things. So it's as if there's a sort of built-in redundancy in the election process.
You're absolutely right. The trouble is that under the current circumstances in Libya, there is no ideal date for elections. The country has been waiting for this democratic process for the last decade. And the assumption among Western power is that waiting a few more years would exacerbate the situation. Hope is that the election process may calm things down, may pacify the warlords and the warring, conflicting tribes into some kind of an agreement based on a consensus that the only way forward is to have an election. And I think that we may be surprised to see that more candidates would come along to convince public opinion that this is the only way to do it. However, in order to make sure that proper and peaceful election would take place in Libya, we need the agreement of the foreign powers, and they are in a complete disagreement with each other. We are talking about Western countries, Arab countries, Turkey, Russia. All of them are involved. All of them are meddling in Libyan domestic affairs. And only a decision by these kind of powers will ensure that such election will go ahead eventually.
And what about the United Nations, Dr. Zadka, which is responsible broadly for this ballot? Is it going to be able to bridge that gap, playing honest broker and ensuring that there is honest, free and fair elections in Libya, in your assessment?
Well, it could be. On this issue, I am more optimistic about it because, after all, there is an agreement between all the various domestic and foreign powers that they have to give as much backing as possible to the electorate commission in order to officiate proper elections. However, some of the tribes that are still at loggerheads with each other, and they are supported by different foreign countries, they may be using the elections in order to buy time as part of a waiting game in which if they don't achieve what they want to achieve in the ballot boxes, they will go back to the years of military confrontation. And I give you an example which could be also a kind of a tip to viewers. It could be that Khalifa Haftar, because he is accused of war crimes, because there is a warrant waiting for him in Tripoli, decide eventually not to run. And instead, he will support his son, Saddam, to run as candidate for him or in his behalf. And I can see what happened a week ago when he paid a secret visit to Israel out of all places. He took a private jet belonging to his father from the United Arab Emirates, and he landed in Tel Aviv airport for 90 minutes, during which he met some Mossad officials that they normally, which do not have any diplomatic relations. And he asked his father for diplomatic, political, and military help.
Right.
Especially military help.
That is really very interesting. As always, great talking with you, Dr. Saul Zadka, the Middle East analyst there, and he is in London.